Remember that timestamps and me are your friend, so if there is something in particular you're looking for, then check those out. Now it kind of goes without saying that if you do not like Musou games, you probably won't like Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, and it also is no surprise that it comes from AAA Games, a studio that's a subsidiary of Koei Tecmo, almost the godfathers of the genre. If, however, you're like me and you've grown up playing Dynasty Warriors, and there is something about being one of 2,000 different warriors who seems to have boundless stamina and a penchant for punching things to really remind you why you play games in the first place. So the Nintendo Switch 2 release is finally here, and we're going to have a look at performance, visual quality, what modes are offered, and I will give you my initial take on gameplay, but obviously we've got coding quite late, so it won't be a full scored review, but I think it will give you some idea as to what to expect and whether this experience is going to be one you're going to enjoy. Is the Age of Imprisonment referring to the amount of time it will take you to finish your backlog, or is this one warrior that's going to Hyrule them all? Man, so bad. Let's find out. Let's kick off then with what options you're given for the Nintendo Switch 2 edition. Well, firstly, you've got the choice of 3 different difficulty modes, and yes, you can change the vertical or horizontal axis independently, something that a surprising amount of people actually do. As well as that, you've got the option to change the sensitivity, thank goodness, because the default camera sensitivity is so slow. And there is motion controlled aiming as well. I had to get that in there, you know how it is. Let's jump straight into image quality then. The game presents a lovely, sharp image, whether you're playing in docked or handheld. The character models are exceptional, and the stylistic way they've presented the world, things like the grass, the pollen and blooms blowing in the breeze, you cannot knock the game for its visual design. Performance in this first section is a flawless 60 frames per second, but that's not actually the most impressive part. The thing that stood out to me straight away was the input latency. So outside of combat, input latency is very good, almost instantaneous. There's no screen tearing. So far, things are looking so good. Level of detail is heavily focused, as you would expect, in the view of the character. I have noticed that when the camera is turned quickly, oftentimes you'll see environmental geometry or scenery fade into view. It's not the most egregious effect, and it's very quick and subtle, but clearly some optimization has been done to make sure things stay at that silky frame rate. This can also be seen in elements like the shadows. Distant, softer shadows have a lower resolution, and if looked at closely, we'll see they're quite pixelated, which stands in stark contrast to Zelda's own shadow, which is very sharp and probably a sensible choice. Dynamic character shadows also are cast onto the main character, so that when she's facing away from the sun, she'll be completely in shadow, and then turning to face it lights everything up. It looks really nice and natural. When in combat, performance does maintain its 60 frames per second most of the time. There are a couple of moments where particular visual effects can cause a slight stutter below that. It's nothing major and certainly not an egregious part of gameplay, but it wouldn't be genuine to say that it's constantly 60 frames per second. As well as that, upon closer inspection, as we see with lots of Nintendo Switch games and Switch 2, they don't use much anti-aliasing. So when you zoom into characters during certain scenes, you can see jaggy edges on most of those, whereas at other times you really don't notice it at all. There are some nice effects in here as well, like some volumetric smoke in some of those scenes, but there is some visual quality variance as well, where some textures and surfaces look a little flatter than I would have liked. But personally, I think it's a sensible art style, and it certainly looks good in motion with some of those special moves. Another nice little artistic choice is the way that story's delivered before you start missions. A piece of parchment covers the screen with hand-drawn characters and a voice-acted piece of narration. It's really simple, but I actually enjoyed it a lot. Okay, next up then, let's have a look at Gameshare and split screen and see how those perform, because Gameshare has worked in a slightly unusual way where it's presented almost like a video quality image on the secondary device, and in some titles it does look quite pixelated. Something straight away has caught my attention, and that's the fact that it's running at 30 frames per second when in Gameshare. Now you may be saying that is a hardware limitation, you know, that's something they have to do. That's not actually the case. In fact, Fast Fusion showed that you could run at 60 frames per second with Gameshare. However, I will say that visual quality was massively reduced, so maybe that's their reasoning, you might think. However, there are certain moments where the game will actually switch to 60 FPS when you're on Gameshare if it's only a one-player segment. I guess the reason that limitation is in place is because regardless of what screen you're on, it's still having to render twice. And when that happens, obviously performance becomes a factor. The 30 is quite consistent, so then we can look at split screen. Now split screen is the same story again, and I did expect it. 30 frames per second. The visual quality takes a mild hit, but it's still more than playable like this. An interesting point of note is that each player gets their own respective control options, so if you want to remap per player, you can do exactly that. It's also very cool, there are certain moves that are synergies between two characters, and if you're side by side with your co-op partner, you can end up controlling a laser beam together to take down a boss or similar. Load times are certainly reasonable. I didn't notice massive load times, and they're kind of disguised as well with tips and tutorials, which is something I don't know why more companies don't do. So performance takeaways then, well, if you're playing single player in handheld or docked mode, performance is pretty much where I expected it to be. 60 frames per second most of the time, the occasional stutter when things get very busy on screen, decent input latency, it just controls really nicely. But if you're playing using Gameshare, a strange drop to 30 FPS, which works just fine, or if you're in split screen, the same thing applies, that 30 frames per second drop. Artistically, I think it looks fantastic. I really enjoy the inclusion of the Zone Eye devices because they provide loads of special effects on screen, the option to ride on top of mechs during combat. It's exactly as I said at the start of the video. If you're a Musou fan, you're gonna love it. The narrative is not something I'm prepared to spoil, but basically, Zelda has found herself outside of her own time, shall we say, on a quest to get back. The player has access to a bunch of quests over Hyrule, and these act as contributions to gradually help with its ongoing development. Each of the different regions has a contribution level that can be raised through performing those missions, gradually rewarding the player in quite an addictive loop. And all of these things will unlock new moves as well, and of course you can switch between the different playable characters during combat if they are part of that mission. As well as this, you can dish out orders to the other members of your party, directing them to go to certain locations, and they'll go off and fight on your behalf until you turn up, or you quickly switch between them, which can be very cool because you can have about 3 different general fights going on at the same time. As well as all of this, you get campsites where they introduce the idea of adding ingredients. It's the idea of cooking, isn't it, really, from Breath of the Wild, to give your players boosts as they go out, and also a bit of a pick-me-up during a mission. If you are after a new Hyrule Warriors game, if you're a big fan of the series, I don't think you're going to find much to dislike here personally. At the risk of fully repeating myself many times, this won't be for everyone, and we will have a full review of it out soon. As it stands though, if performance was your only concern, then you can rest pretty easy. Things are nice here, with only a very few performance dips, and the obvious caveat of 30 FPS if you're going to play in split screen or using Gameshare. It's my understanding that the game is about the same length as the last title. It's too early, as I say, to give a full score, but it feels to me a step up. I may be alone in that, but I'm really enjoying it. It will set you back about £58.99 or your regional equivalent. There's obviously a physical as well. It's not a cheap game by any means, and the big area I obviously didn't discuss, being story, has started really well, and it's nice to see a bit of the background of some of the, let's say, big players in the Zelda series. A thank you to all of you that enjoy this content. I hope it's of some use. Let me know by your comments down below, and I'll make sure to reply to as many as I can. Thank you to our Patreons, our members, and all of you for all things Switch all the time. Keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya.